Hello, and welcome to Andrew Broussard Watercolors. Today, we're going to do a fast and loose watercolor tonalist landscape painting. In front of me, I have a quarter sheet of Stonehenge Aqua. It is 140-pound cold press, 100% cotton. I thoroughly coated it with water, and I don't quite have my palette set up, but I'll pause the camera whenever it's time for me to put out something new. I kind of just wanted to dive into painting and just essentially make up something as we go along. I'm thinking we'll focus Burnt Umber, and if I do Burnt Umber, maybe it'll be a Burnt Umber, Raw Umber combination. I'm going to use the kind of wet and wet technique back and forth that I play around with, and it's based off of an approach that I've seen with oil painters, the tonalist oil painters, Stuart Davies and Dennis Sheehan, where they'll take their oil paints, thin them out, apply them very fast and loose to a smooth gessoed surface, and kind of wipe back and forth with paper towels, the bristle brush, and create textures and allow a scene to be created as they paint. This is really nothing new of a technique. I've been playing around with it for a while, but I genuinely don't think I developed it or anything like that. If you watch Stuart Davies and Dennis Sheehan, like I said, they do that with their oils, but David Usher will paint around wet and wet. Mine in Watercolor will paint around wet and wet. I even watched a video by the Watercolor Society, I think American Watercolor Society, where the presenter mixed up some black and cobalt blue and went really heavy wet and wet, and even picked up the paper and just tilted around and let a scene create in the fog. So, there's a lot of people that have played around with this approach, and probably a lot of different approaches to the approach. So for me, the scene is going to get developed as we go. I'm going heavy with my pigment, but we'll let it soften, and like I said, if need be, we'll use the paper towel to redirect. The main thing to keep in mind is that you can lift, remove water, soften, and you can take the hake and go right back into it. And it really allows for a lot of fun, exploration, to learn the handling of the paper, to learn the handling of water on whatever type of brush you're using. You can do this with a flat brush, a big old squirrel mop. I'm sure the Chinese brushes you can play around with. So you have a lot of different potential ways of just having fun. You can see how your pigment interacts if it wants to granulate with a certain type of paper that you're using. And it's also just almost meditative. With the fast and loose, especially with no plan beforehand, you may find that you create a lot of the same scene over and over again. And why that is, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's a subconscious thing where we are constantly reworking something that we find interesting to ourselves, or there's just a certain aesthetic that maybe we personally like. But, and of course, you're more than welcome to follow along and to follow suit and have fun. This Burnt Umber is most likely either the Cotman or Da Vinci brand. I have a mixture of those tubes. I also have the what's the other tube? Some of the Daniel Smith, but due to the price point of the Daniel Smith, I will kind of save that for special occasions and explorations. And using pigments like these and these brands is totally fine. You're less likely to be timid if you're using a cheaper paint. So in other news, have been exploring a lot of different mediums and approaches. I always am, especially with this channel. I'm always wanting to try to find new things. And lately I've been playing with printmaking, either the block cutting, which is relief cutting, or the etching, which is the opposite of that. Let me pause the camera for a moment. I mentioned that for two reasons. One is that the art desk becomes very cluttered and things get moved around, so I'm looking for my different scraping tools. I have these that were made by Mr. Mark, a very nice gentleman that's been painting and exploring making different tools for scraping. You can use the round edge of a credit card, which I had just kind of cut a round edge here because I can't find the one piece I've been using for the longest time, which is right here. Finally found it. But you know, playing with different mediums, it kind of gets the art desk all mismatched. My paper's super wet right now, so any type of scraping is going to result in dark marks. Sometimes I back myself into a hole whenever I do that. Whenever things lighten up, those dark marks kind of get darker. So I'll move away from there and save some of that scraping for later on. But that's something to watch out for and explore what can happen scraping during the different stages. I don't want to force any dry offs currently because I'm just still having fun building up this image. The other reason I mentioned the etching, the block printing, and the monotype is that I've been exploring how to kind of pull over the tonalist feeling into those printing processes, and trying to really kind of put together a definition of tonalism for myself, which sometimes pigeonholes us. Like, you might say to yourself, I want to be an impressionist painter, and you start studying all the impressionist works and you start looking at all these different things. You know, maybe Fauvists, and you look at the colors and the palettes that they used. But it's really fantastic to study the masters and to read the books on them. But what I'm going to say is that sometimes you get like kind of bogged down and pigeonholed trying to define what you're doing, and you wind up not doing it. So I'm not quite sure what I'm trying to say right there. I did find a list that I had found at the beginning of my watercolor painting exploration a few years ago. It's on, I think, the artsy.net. One day I need to link to that and maybe even do a discussion of the different points where it was I don't know if it's an art critic, art historian, I'm not sure the terminology, but somebody who delved very, very deep into tonalism and tonalism of the 1880s to 1920s and explored the different aesthetic properties or visual properties of them, and kind of broke down tonalism of that time period into 12 or 13 different attributes. Fantastic article. It's really, really interesting. And then it makes you think, how can you carry that over to, like I said, printmaking? And how can you carry it over to pen and ink? So I think traditionally we'll see it in oils and then watercolors. I think it was Charles Warren Eaton was a tonalist watercolor painter. Also a lot of examples kind of like do like a weird nostalgia pain in the heart, because they're often like Long Island sunset or Long Island stream. And I grew up on Long Island. Granted, Long Island has, I think, more of a population than the entire state of Louisiana, but there's something nostalgic about the tonalist feel. And maybe if I hadn't even grown up on Long Island, I would still feel that way looking at it. It's definitely an art movement that transcends New York, and often articles will refer the Barbizon movement out of France. So, you know, they're definitely influenced by different things. So, I don't know. Just food for thought. I've also been filming a lot of just time lapses with the experiments and converting things to the super shorts. I've been putting a lot of content out there, so I hope you all are enjoying that, and that it's satisfying different people's desires for different types of art videos. Some people like a quick time lapse, some people like the 15-second, and some like in-depth. Just like some of you have commented that you prefer, you really enjoy the fact that I'll speak during the videos as opposed to playing music and then orating over it. So everybody has a different preferred method. Just trying to reach the whole big audience and have fun with it. So far we're still just in Burnt Umber. It's just such a great color to play around with, especially if you feel like you haven't painted in a while. Let's see where we're at moisture wise. Some people have talked about having trouble staying in the wet and wet phase, or that their paper will dry too quick. I think it's often atmospheric conditions, which kind of oddly I know at the moment. It's about 79 degrees with humidity, dew point, I think in the 40s or 50s. In my house, the temperature is down to 65, 60-ish. So if I'm not mistaken, lower temperature would raise the potential humidity. I'm not sure. But if that's helpful to y'all in any way, let me know. The reason I know all that is I went longboarding earlier, and it's a few days away from Halloween, and it's 80 degrees outside in Louisiana. Should be a lot colder. one would hope. But I always like to look at the weather to kind of get an idea of what to expect, how much I need to hydrate, what I need to prepare for. Lately, I've been just dealing so much with the wind. There's this one road, this country road, that I'll take north for a few miles. And I had an average mile per hour of over 10 miles per hour, which I was like, finally. And then on the way back, heading south, where the wind was headed from, it dropped me down to 7 miles per hour, just struggling against that wind. We're also harvesting the cane, burning some of the fields. I had to be careful on the country road. There was some cane trucks being loaded and driving past. But they were nice and cautious when they drove past. They didn't fly past. I'm guessing all that sugar cane is just used for sugar. We do have the Steen syrup manufacturing plant nearby. Using the sharper end of my scraping tool. So kind of fiddling around. We're still in what I call the wet and wet phase. In the beginning of my watercolor exploration, there was also a lot of artists that would talk about the different stages of the wet and wet. And I mentioned that earlier, that's just really something to learn how to handle and to have fun with, to explore. We might just stay in Burnt Umber. You can see how some areas are starting to dry, and the application looks different. We start to get a different texture to happen. Though if we keep going over an area with the brush, we'll essentially create that spot wet and wet again. So just be careful with that. I haven't put any water on my brush since the start of the painting. I have put water on the rigger whenever I use that, and that helped out. I'm gonna try to really build up this dark here. I'm pulling off the dry palette, so you'll probably see a little bit of struggling there. I don't know if I mentioned, I'm also preparing for the Omelette Fest. In my hometown, they have a festival. And they have it in a few different countries, I think. It's kind of an international festival where the different cities and different countries will put it on. And they'll have a giant omelet cooked. And kind of the people from it will travel to the different festivals and take part in the different ones. Anywho, so it started in the year I was born. Down here, they do 5,000 plus eggs for each year of the festival. How much that makes it out to, I'm not sure. But I'll have a booth set up with my watercolors, oils, darkroom photography, pen and ink, the etchings, the prints. So I'm excited. You know, help pay off art supplies, hopefully. And before all like the lockdowns and stuff, there was I had done that, the Alma Fest, and I had demoed oil paintings. I haven't oil painted in months, and somebody had requested that I do some on YouTube. I just haven't gotten around to it. I apologize for that, but I need to determine if I want to demo watercolor, oils, or maybe just even etching and printing at that market. Not that I'm like required to demo or anything like that. I think it's fun, and I think it adds experience. And I like you know, kind of teaching. I mean, I am a teacher, school teacher. Think about how we can build up these two corners here. I feel like we should come across. One thing that I've talked about in the past and kind of wondered about is that I'm often told not to put too much detail into foregrounds, kind of like just different art rules, where you don't want your viewer to get just stuck in the foreground. They want to travel their eye into the painting itself. But if you look at Hudson River Valley painters and the masters, you'll see a lot of detail, but tonally they seem to be very close together, all the objects, whether it's a lot of branches, twigs, people. And I think that lack of just a harsh contrast is what helps prevent the eye from staying in that region while still having plenty of detail in it if you choose to explore the foreground. So what I'm doing is just taking this card and just pushing essentially this kind of puddle of pigment around and just creating layers with it, not really scratching completely back to the paper, just attempting to get that illusion of texture there. I do know after we do a dry off, I will wind up going into the trees in the sky, or the foliage more, emphasize some more darks. But so far we're at a really nice point. The camera does film it a little bit redder, and we could keep on playing with this further and further, but we're about 23 minutes in, so I'm going to pause this. We'll do a dry off. Keep an eye out for if you see any tonal shift, meaning that things lightened up as it dried, and we're going to jump into the next stage. All right, we feel it pretty dry. Through looking through the camera, it does look a little lighter. Like I said, my camera films it a little bit redder. In person, it's a little softer. Maybe with just more of a chocolatey feel to it. I'm going to put out fresh from the tube Burnt Umber, just so I'm not struggling to build up pigment at this point. This is Cotman brand. And to kind of show you how my brush is, so I never wet it since the beginning of the painting. You can see that there's still a little bit of moisture on there. At this point, it's a little difficult to kind of get going what you want. You could play around, but you might glob some on. If you were to try to get a little bit more water on, you could literally just take the edge and just dip the edge a little bit. And honestly, that's probably more than enough water right there. So playing with the water control, pinching water at the base, there's a lot of different things you can do. So the goal here is to darken my tonal value. This adds some texture as well, so it's going to switch things up a little bit. But I want to make sure I don't stay within that singular tonal range. And this is a quarter sheet, so it's 11 by 15. If it was to be matted, a mat would come to about here and about there. So the edges wouldn't show, but I like to paint to the edges. It, for me, helps get rid of the whites to kind of throw things off. And it also I don't know, it just helps make a fuller scene for me. One thing I've been thinking about lately, though I haven't read the book lately, Carlson's Guide to Landscape Painting, 1920. Fantastic advice, fantastic references. You know, talking about like tonal values and where things are in landscapes. But almost every example in the book is a snow scene, which throws off tonality out the window, how the sky compares to the ground in tonality wise. But it's so great that people throughout history have recorded their processes or have put their thought on the paper. I previously mentioned the dry point etching exploration and how I wanted to kind of get a tonalist, moody feel to it. I was looking at Rembrandt's etchings, who had just a different feel to it, at least for me. And when I was just looking up about Rembrandt, there's just not really much that he had said or put to paper. So unfortunately, stuff like that, it's lost to history. Well, people like Van Gogh, who had written tons and tons of letters, I think all those are saved. I think there's books of them out there. Of him writing letters to his brother Leo, I think. I want to help ground these fellas. Somebody on Facebook page, Watercolors Beginners and Beyond, had posted that they'd bought a, I don't know if it was a Rigger Silver Black Velvet number 8 or a round number 8, and they were struggling and couldn't get it to do what they want. But each brush has a different purpose. You could also find the different types of marks you can make with a brush. You see that so much of this was made with just a paper towel, a hake, credit card, and a number 1. And the number 1 itself has so much texture potential and expressive mark making and thin lines. So explore the brushes that you have. None of my brushes are super expensive, but then you do have to think of things in context, where I might think that, I don't know how much these cost anymore, because this one's like 4 or 5 years old. Let's say it's $15, $20. I'd pay that all day for a new one. It just doesn't seem like a lot, you know, for what it does. Where somebody who has never played with a hake before, it might just seem, you know, better to invest in paper or more paint. So it's all subjective. At the end of the day, I'm just hanging out with my cats, painting, wearing shorts that have surfing dinosaurs on them. And that's what life's all about. Let's do a dry off and see where we're at. So, a good friend who I talk to almost every day, another painter. When you think about it, Joe Menza, I always mention him. Me and him, Matthew Clemens, and him moderate a Facebook page dedicated to fast and loose watercolor painting. It's Ron Ranson Disciples. He once commented he has an eye for really watching people paint in videos and seeing and breaking down their approach. And I think that he's just done a lot of that. He's done it with other artists. And he kind of commented that I have a few different layers that I'll do. And I had thought about that while I was doing the dry off. If I wanted to kind of come back in and just do a little bit more. And you see, with these guys, I'm really not too stressed about how I'm putting them in. I'm not trying to lay right on top of pre-existing lines. I'm just building up a density and illusion of that fact. You know, Stuart Davies will talk about like the illusion of detail. I think that's his video that has just tons of views on YouTube. And you know, with a simple mark like this, I'm making 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 marks. And I'm building up that rather than sitting there and putting in every single one. So some of these scenes might seem complicated, but as you play around and as you explore, as you see the mark making potential, it'll happen and you'll develop your own style. And you might go the meticulous path. You might like the fast and loose look, but maybe it's not for you. Maybe you are a more meticulous painter, which is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, there's purists that will, I don't know, maybe it's just people that kind of just lack tact. Will say that something has a better look if it's fast and loose, or if there's a single application or whatever, and it'll kind of come through as a rule, or it'll seem like that. But really, there is no rules as long as you're having fun. Like I said, as long as you're hanging out with your cats, dogs, listening to music, whatever makes it all worthwhile for you. That's what's important. We'll do our last dry off, we'll sign it, and then we'll sign off. So there you have it. So, of course, please like, subscribe, follow. You are more than welcome to follow along with anything that I do. And you are more than welcome to sell anything you do whenever you follow any one of my paintings. You have my express permission to do that. I want you guys to be successful, to have fun, and to be able to afford art supplies. A huge thank you to all my supporters, those of you that have sent the super thanks on YouTube, those of you that support me on the Patreon, where I have exclusive content if you want to see some more stuff, and the people that have donated through the Ko-Fi. So thank you all so much. I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for you all. So thank you, and have a wonderful day.